Welcome to the Legal View. I'm David Hogg, and this is Aaron Gartlan. Tonight's guest is Dr. Kirk Eriksen, Dothan chiropractor.
And on tonight's edition of the Legal Brief, David and I are going to be discussing a recent development in a wrongful death case that we're currently handling.
American law is complex and not always easily understood, so a little help and advice can go a long way. The attorneys of Hogg and Gartlan Law Firm in Dothan present Legal View.
The Legal View with Hogg and Gartlan.
Dr. Eriksen, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Eriksen, you're a chiropractor here in Dothan. If you would, tell our viewers a little bit about how long you've been in practice here, some background on you, where you're from.
Okay. I've been in Dothan, Alabama since 1992. I'm originally from Central Florida in the Ocala-Denellen region, and enjoyed having a practice here in Dothan for now about 20 years.
And what do you specialize in? Do you have a specialty, or do you handle a broad variety of patients and treatments?
Well, we have primarily a family practice, and we do take care of patients with all sorts of problems. I guess you could say if I had a specialty, it would be of the upper cervical region. Not that we don't focus on the lower back, which we do, but the part of the spine that we focus on correcting is the alignment of the head and neck, because that affects the alignment of the entire spine.
And you've actually written some books.
Yes. I have two textbooks. My publisher is Lippincott, Williams & Wilkins. The first textbook came out the end of 2003. It was called Upper Cervical Subluxation Complex, and it's a review of about 1,200 research studies and books on the topic of the cervical spine and the subluxation and the care that goes about correcting this. The second textbook came out March of 2007. And it is entitled Orthospinalogy Procedures, and that textbook is on the how-to of doing this work. Basically, how to teach doctors and chiropractic students how to make these type of spinal corrections.
And you also have written, or you are writing articles for a journal, a medical journal, is that correct?
Yes. Over the years, I've published several different research studies. The most current study, which I'm the most excited about, is actually coming out next week in a journal called BMC Musculoskeletal Disorders. The study involves 1,100 patients. There was 83 doctors involved in the study, but the study looked at the effectiveness of this type of care, the patient safety, and the patient satisfaction.
And where were the patients drawn from for this study?
All across the United States, in Canada, and two of the doctors were actually in Europe. One was in London, England, and one was in Spain. Well,
that's very impressive. And tonight, I think you want to talk about automobile accidents and safety concerning children and teenagers. Is that right?
Yes.
And you have a special interest in that area?
Well, over the years, I've taken care of countless patients that were injured in motor vehicle accidents, and some of the more tragic ones are children. And children can be hurt sometimes worse in a motor vehicle accident because of the ratio between the size of their head and neck, which obviously their head is larger than neck compared to an adult, and the weakness of the musculature that supports their neck. And a lot of times these are things that won't even show up initially pain-wise, but down the road it can show up. So I think that's something that is very important to address, and I wanted to look at some of the safety concerns.
Dr. Eriksen, I believe, or I understand you to say that maybe children are more susceptible to injury or greater injury sometimes than adults are.
Sometimes, and of course, adults and certain risk factors for adults also that will cause them to be hurt worse than in an accident compared to another adult. But children obviously, are at a serious risk.
Risk factors.
Yes.
And tell us about those. What are those risk factors?
Well, accidental injury is the leading cause of death in children and teenagers. And motor vehicle accidents account for greater than 50% of the deaths for kids. And to put that in proper perspective, 1 in less than 50 children will die in a motor vehicle accident by the time they turn 25 years of age. And 1 in 20 will be seriously injured. So it's a serious
Wow,
problem. There's a reason why insurance is more expensive for teenagers than adults, because a teenager is about 4 times as likely to be in a car crash than an adult. And teenage boys are a little more of a risk because a teenage boy is about twice as likely to die in a motor vehicle accident than a girl.
Dr. Eriksen, that's very sobering. Can you maybe give us some numbers that would quantify what we're talking about here?
Well, over 5,000 teenagers on average die every year in a motor vehicle accident. And in the cases of children that die in car accidents, in over 50% of those cases, they were not restrained.
So in other words, they're not wearing their seatbelt.
Not in a seatbelt,
or a car safety
not in
seat.
a car safety seat or booster seat.
Well, that's pretty incredible because, you know, you would think everyone knows that they should have their child in a child safety seat. Tell us more about that, the importance of properly restraining the child, how they should be restrained, where they should be in the car.
Yes. Obviously, infants need to be in a car seat. And we know that if you'll do that properly, okay, you can reduce the risk of an infant dying by about 70% if you do that. And then the risk is about 50% for toddlers. Now, babies need to be in rear-facing car seats up until about the age of 1 or 20 pounds. And but where you put that car seat is very important, because what we know is that the seat doesn't need to be in the front seat, right? And of course, the first thing we think of, well, because you have a front passenger airbag. And that is true, but what we have to keep in mind, that's not the only reason. Studies show that if we put that child in that car seat in the back seat, that we can reduce the risk of death by about 50% if you have a front passenger airbag. However, if you don't have a front passenger airbag and you still put them in the back seat, you still are reducing the risk of death in about over a third of the cases.
And why is that?
Well, the federal guidelines tell us that children should stay in the back seat up until the age of 12. Now, I know people listening to this are shaking their heads saying that's not happening, right? So that brings up a couple points. Number one, it's not happening because you don't want to deal with the grief from your child, right? But first of all, who's in control, the adult or the child? You know, I grew up in an era where kids had no rights. Now kids have all the rights, and parents have to succumb to the child. But again, if we want to be more practical about it, what I do with my kids and what I tell people is at least shoot for double digits, at least shoot for age 10. And I know kids come in different sizes and shapes, and that varies a little bit there. But obviously, the trauma is going to be much less in the back seat than the front seat. But also this, where in the back seat? If you'll put your child in that car seat in the back center, you can reduce their risk of serious injury and death by about 20%, as opposed to putting them in the rear side. And again, that's because of a side impact trauma.
Right. Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Well, Dr. Eriksen, I know you gave us numbers related to quantify the number of deaths every year. I'm sure there's some studies and statistics related to injuries. You're talking about injuries and reducing the risk of injury. What are those numbers? Can you tell us what those numbers are related to teens and children that are injured every year in automobile accidents?
Well, I guess if I could maybe further on the last point, I wanted to mention, I was talking to one of my patients yesterday who's a fireman, and make sure that people do realize that you can go to the police station or the fire station and they will check your car seat to make sure that it is installed correctly. That is important. And I do want to say that you keep a child in that car seat until they reach the height or the weight limit of that seat recommends. And then what do? You don't put them in a seat belt. You put them in a booster seat. Okay, and booster seats can reduce the risk of serious injury by about 60%. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that seat belts are not designed for children; they're designed for adults. Okay, so a child has to be, they say 4'9" is the height that now you can get them out of a booster seat, put them in a seat belt. Seatbelt should, when they can get in a seatbelt, is when the seatbelt can come down across their chest, obviously, so it's not up here by their throat. That could cause, serious throat and neck injuries. But also that the lap belt can fit snugly across the upper thighs, because you cannot have a seatbelt up against the abdomen. Because if you get into a serious car accident, you can literally rip the viscera internally and major blood vessels. And I'll tell you an example I had many years ago. I had a patient who was about 3 years old, and he was at his grandmother's house, and the grandmother wanted to go to the grocery store really quick, right around the corner. Well, she didn't have a car seat, so she put him in the front seat, strapped him in the seat belt, and she hits a telephone pole. Well, it ends up cracking his pelvis because, again, the torsional stress and little kid and seatbelt not designed to fit him properly. And of course, he did okay. He recovered eventually. But it's just important that we take the time to think before we do something, because consequences can be serious.
Are there any other things that you can do to protect children in an automobile other than what we've discussed with the seats, with the booster seats and car seats?
That probably talks to, the type of vehicle you're in and whatnot. I guess I would like to say, I don't want to come across holier than thou about this, because we all make mistakes. We try to do the best we can, and I'm basically just a beggar telling other beggars where I found some bread, and so we just need to try to do the best we can, and just put some time into it, because it's really serious, as we talked about earlier. There's just so many tragic deaths that occur. I know when I was in high school, there was a period of 2 years where there were so many car accidents and so many kids that I went to school with that died in accidents. And I'll never forget the summer before my senior year, I was going out with a girl from another school, another town, went out for the first date. We're going to go out again, and never heard from her, couldn't get a hold of her. Lo and behold, to find out later, her and her friends all died in a car accident. Semi-truck had hit them and killed all of them. And it just seemed like there was just so many of these incidents that happened. And some things, no matter how well you're restrained or what kind of vehicle you're in, there's nothing you can do. But in the situations you can, when I talk in terms of reducing a risk by 50%, what does that mean? That means if we have 10 children, we're talking about saving the lives of 5 of them. How important is that? That's what 50% means. Otherwise, it's just a number I'm throwing out. But it's real lives, and we can do things to help prevent untimely deaths.
Well, and not just reduce deaths, but reduce injury or the extent of the injury.
Absolutely. And that's where we get into talking about soft tissue injuries. People get into car accidents, and one of the first things that someone will ask is that, well, did they break anything? And they'll say, well, no, they didn't break anything, as if now they're okay. And we both all know that that's totally not true. A soft tissue injury is a very serious situation that requires long treatment, and according to the studies, unfortunately, is something that becomes chronic in a high percentage of patients, so something that someone will have to deal with for years to come. I'll give you an example of something here recent. My son plays football at Providence Christian, and he got a high ankle sprain, in the second game of the season. Well, he would have been better off if he broke his ankle than to get that high ankle sprain, because John Brantley for the Florida Gators has one, and he's not going to be playing for a while. And it's because the connective tissue just doesn't heal like bone. When bone breaks, heals up, you're good to go. Soft tissue injury is something that when the body mends the ligaments and connective tissue, many times it mends weaker and with a different type of tissue than what you had previously. Now, the younger you are when you get injured, the better outcome you tend to have as far as that healing. But adults can have a worse outcome.
Do you have something similar to scar tissue that develops?
Yes. When they've looked at this tissue under microscopes, they look at, it's a different type of tissue. It has more type of extra nerve fibers that grow in there, basically, that makes it more sensitive. But you're exactly right. It's a type of scar tissue.
So then the person would naturally have pain over a longer period of time if you have more nerve endings and so forth.
Yes, more sensitive. It's not like cutting your skin and injuring your skin, and then you cut, you bleed, then you scab over, and then it heals and it looks perfect. Okay? Connective tissue is a different animal.
How can you treat this?
Well, it involves a very complex multimodality type procedure. You would do a combination of physical therapy, okay, spinal adjustments to realign and correct the spine, nutritional supplements, like for instance, taking lots of vitamin C has been shown to help with collagen development and helping with outcome. There's other supplements one could take as well. Depending on the severity of the injury, there are certain types of tests that might need to be done, MRIs, CAT scans, things of that nature. But we, in our practice, we are never hesitate to refer a patient out to another specialist, whether it be a spine specialist, a massage therapist, and in some rare cases, we might even, and maybe not so much just someone who's been in a motor vehicle accident, but other patients might need a psychologist. I'm really big on psychological counseling over drugging them, and because I want to deal with the cause of the problem and have a patient learn coping strategies instead of just taking pills for everything, because true health comes from inside out, not outside in, as a general rule.
And Dr. Eriksen, when you talk about referring them for psychological type counseling, have you found that sometimes after somebody has been injured that that creates stress and anxiety and problems in their life?
Yes, it's really clear. I mean, without even going into the research studies, chronic pain does lead to different type of depressive situations, and it's kind of a two-edged sword. The pain causes depression, and when you're depressed, that makes your pain more sensitive. Okay, and sometimes you need to try to get them out of pain, number one. But then again, as I said, sometimes people need to learn coping strategies, and there's trained professionals out there that really do a good job helping. And also, my church at Covenant United Methodist, they have what's called the Stevens Ministry, which are trained lay people that are trained to, not as a counselor, so to speak, but to listen and help people. And it's a service that's free of charge at our church. And I have used that service as well for patients on occasion.
Sure. I know over the years, David and I have had clients that they're accustomed to getting up and going to work every day and providing for their family and caring for their family. And then after an injury, whether it's a car wreck or an on-the-job injury, they're no longer able to do that. And you can really see a change in their outlook and their in their appearance, their personality, and I know from experience it can really create a hardship for a family.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Eriksen, when you talk about referring out to other professionals, these other professionals help deal with different aspects of this person's needs. But would you agree that treatment should involve the whole person?
Mind, body, and spirit.
And that's what you attempt to do?
Yes, and I really truly believe that people deserve the best of not just both worlds, all worlds, when it comes to health care. And they're entitled to that.
Well, you mentioned football. Are you for children playing football or not?
Absolutely. And we're right in the heart of Friday night football. As a matter of fact, I coach JV football at Providence Christian School, and love the job that Coach Emery Latta does with the varsity. My son plays for him, and really supportive of the great job he does with those boys. And I know, Aaron, you played for Emery in high school.
Sure.
Back in the day. And one thing that is disheartening is the numbers of parents that will discourage their boys from playing football, for fear of him getting injured and whatnot. And football is a physical sport. There's always that risk of getting hurt, but it's always relative risks. A lot of times, these are the same parents that will allow their son to ride around on a motorcycle, and a lot of times without even a helmet on. And what about trampolines? We think nothing of letting our kids jump around on trampolines, but yet each year about 100,000 kids are seriously hurt, or not just kids, but even adults. 100,000, most of them are children, but about 100,000 people a year are getting hurt on trampolines. And in one particular year, there were 6 deaths attributed to trampolines. But we think nothing of that. But football, there's been a lot of talk about concussions, rightfully so. But in my opinion, in this current day and age, even with players getting bigger, stronger, faster, it is the safest period of time to play football. Because why? Well, coaches are much more educated on the safety aspects of, picking up signs of concussions and not letting kids play. I know that's what we do at Providence and other schools as well. Equipment is safer. There are helmets out now that actually have been shown to be safer in helping protect. There's no helmet that will prevent that's concussion proof, but there are helmets that are safer. And but the big thing is, as coaches, to teach safer techniques. But the thing, again, that I hate to see parents discourage a child from taking part in something that will last with them a lifetime. I mean, I played for a great coach in high school. My coach is Richard Kennedy, who's being inducted into the Hall of Fame in Florida in January. And I have memories that, I've lectured in Europe, all across the United States and Central America. And yet I would trade all that just to go and play on Friday nights again.
Well, Dr. Eriksen, it's obvious that you have a passion for children and for their health, their safety. By the way, how old are your children?
I have a 17-year-old and an 11-year-old.
Well, great. And if someone wants to contact your office and schedule an appointment, where are you located and how can they reach you?
My office is at 2500 Flowers Chapel Road here in Dothan, Alabama. And my phone number is 793-7992.
Well, Aaron, I hope a lot of parents are watching tonight and will take heed to Dr. Eriksen's words about care for children in cars and restraining children.
I do too. I know it was some sobering facts and statistics, and I think sometimes just things with everyday life, maybe we take, sometimes take safety for granted, and I think that carries over not only in everyday life, but oftentimes in the workplace. I think sometimes safety is taken for granted at times, and there's a lot of things that can be done to make the work environment safer.
I agree.